Welcome to This Explainer. For literally thousands of years, people have tried to crack the code of the end times. The Book of Revelation, with all its vivid imagery and complex timelines, has fascinated and frustrated folks in equal measure. Well, today, we're going to objectively unpack a highly specific, incredibly intricate eschatological theory presented by the YouTube channel Revealing Revelation. If you're someone who loves structured information and a really systematic approach to ancient texts, you are in for a fascinating ride. Now, we aren't here to debate the theology. Instead, we're going to map out exactly how this channel constructs its timeline, turning what many see as a totally unsolvable mystery into a highly structured mathematical puzzle. Let's get started.
But of that day and hour knows no man. This incredibly famous verse is our central mystery for today. For centuries, that phrase has been read by a lot of people as a definitive command to just stop looking, a clear statement that the end times are fundamentally unknowable. But as you'll see, the source material we're analyzing today flips that completely on its head. According to their theory, this isn't a stop sign at all. It's actually a solvable cipher. They view it as a specific historical clue pointing to a specific historical event. And honestly, looking at it that way changes the entire way you read the text.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our agenda for today. 1. The day and hour mystery. 2. A 14-year timeline. 3. The Feast of Trumpets. 4. 2 separate returns. And 5. The final Jubilee year.
Section 1. The Day and Hour Mystery.
To really understand this theory, we first have to look at how the source material categorizes the Synoptic Gospels. The channel argues that these Gospels aren't just repeating the exact same story to the same audience from slightly different angles. Instead, they propose a really rigid structural division. In this framework, Luke represents the pre-tribulation period. Mark represents the mid-tribulation, specifically corresponding to the 7 years of seals. And Matthew represents the post-tribulation, linking to the 7 years of trumpets. Now think about why this matters. If you're trying to build a perfect chronological timeline, a missing detail in one of the Gospels is a massive problem. And there's a huge scriptural anomaly right here. Luke entirely omits the famous day and hour phrase. But by placing Luke in the pre-tribulation period, this theory neatly solves the anomaly. If Luke's timeline happens before the tribulation even begins, his narrative simply doesn't connect to the day and hour event. It's a perfect structural fit for their argument.
Section 2. A 14-year timeline.
Now, what's really interesting about this timeline is how the source completely redefines the traditional eschatological model. Instead of the standard 7-year tribulation that many of us are familiar with, they stretch the events into a much longer 14-year period. Notice the first block of 7 years on the left. The channel constructs 2 distinct blocks. The first 7 years correspond strictly to the Gospel of Mark and the prophetic seals. Then right in the middle, at year 7, a major shift occurs. The subsequent block, years 8 through 14, corresponds directly to the Gospel of Matthew and the sounding of the trumpets. So the crucial point is that through this highly structured lens, the tribulation events aren't happening all at once. They're stretched sequentially across a massive 14-year canvas.
And just to be completely precise with how they map this out, there's a very brief addition. Alongside these 14 years, the channel includes a short 50-day period they refer to as being above. So what does that actually mean? Well, it acts as a sort of structural buffer. It's a preparatory period that completes the exact parameters of their prophetic structure right before the massive 14-year sequence officially kicks off.
Section 3. The Feast of Trumpets. All right, this is where we shift back to solving our central mystery. How does the channel actually decode the day and the hour? To do that, they don't look at math first. They actually look to history and culture. According to the theory, the day and hour no one knows isn't a metaphor at all. It's a literal historical reference to Rosh Hashanah, also known as the Feast of Trumpets. You have to remember, in the ancient world, calendars weren't calculated years in advance using software. They were completely observational. This specific fall feast was entirely dependent on 2 witnesses physically staring into the night sky, waiting to spot the tiny, faint sliver of the new crescent moon. Only when those witnesses confirmed the sighting could the high priest blow the shofar to officially signal the start of the feast.
And this, right here, is the key to the entire riddle. Imagine waiting for a massive, society-wide event, but you have a 48-hour window where it could happen at literally any second. Because the sighting of the new moon could happen on either the first day of the 7th month or the second day of the 7th month, the exact hour was historically unknown until the very last moment. No one knew the exact day or hour the trumpet would blow. They only knew the 2-day window. By applying this historical context, the scriptural cipher is essentially solved. The unknown day and hour isn't some impossible mystical puzzle. It simply refers to the Feast of Trumpets.
Section 4. 2 separate returns.
Now that the cipher is solved, the theory points out a fascinating, minute detail in the text. The day and hour phrase appears twice, once in Mark and once in Matthew. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer depth of the channel's analysis. They argue that these aren't just parallel, repetitive accounts of a single event. No, they are two completely distinct events on their 14-year timeline, separated by literally a single preposition. Think about why a single word matters here. Precision is everything in this theory. In Mark's account, which occurs at the end of the 6th year, the return is described as coming in the clouds. But in Matthew's account, which culminates at the end of year 14, the text specifically says coming on the clouds. The source highlights this tiny linguistic difference, in versus on, to anchor two entirely separate moments in their grand chronology.
Let's weave these events together and look a bit closer at the sequence in Mark's timeline. According to the channel, the phrase, after 6 days, is actually a prophetic code for after 6 years. So as the first 6 years of the seals come to a close, the kingdom comes with power, coming in the clouds. Then as we transition into the 7th year, the 144,000 are sealed. This is followed by a mid-tribulation rapture of a great multitude. All of these monumental events are categorized squarely under Mark's narrative. They represent the first major milestone, the first fulfillment of that unknown day and hour.
Now let's see how this all builds within Matthew's timeline. Fast forward to the very end of the massive 14-year period. The 7th trumpet sounds, and Revelation chapter 10 declares the mystery of God is finished. But why is it finished right here? Well, because, as the theory outlines, this second day and hour event is a literal physical return to Earth. Aligning perfectly with the prophecies in Zechariah chapter 14, the return here is feet down, right on the Mount of Olives. It's not just in the clouds anymore, it is visible to everyone, shining from the east to the west like lightning.
Section 5. The Final Jubilee Year.
This is where the source ties the entire 14-year theory together with staggering mathematical precision, using the ancient biblical concept of the Jubilee. In biblical tradition, a Jubilee cycle is made up of 7 sets of 7 years. 7 times 7 gives us 49 years. If you love mathematical symmetry, this is where the theory is going to absolutely blow your mind. The channel's mathematical model proposes that the 14 years of tribulation we just mapped out don't just exist in a vacuum, they actually represent the final 2 7-year blocks of this much larger cycle. Therefore, the 14th year of the tribulation is, mathematically speaking, the 49th year in the grand overarching cycle.
And, as you might guess, following the 49th year, you naturally have the 50th year, the Jubilee year. The source identifies this Jubilee as the ultimate culmination of the entire timeline. It arrives immediately after the grueling 14 years of seals and trumpets have finally concluded. It represents total restoration and completion.
Now let's slow this down for a second, because the math here is absolutely critical. The source argues that this final 14th year perfectly mirrors the days of Noah mentioned in Matthew. Let's look at the math step by step. Historically, the biblical flood started on the 2nd month, 17th day, and the earth was completely dry by the 2nd month, 27th day of the following year. If you do the math, that period lasts exactly 1 year and 10 days. The channel points out something incredible. If you take that exact duration, 1 year and 10 days, and you add it to the 49th year, it lands precisely on the 10th day of the 7th month. Why does that matter so much to this theory? Because the 10th day of the 7th month is the exact specific biblical day designated to sound the trumpet and trigger the 50th Jubilee year. It's an incredibly meticulous mathematical alignment that locks their entire timeline completely into place.
And that brings us to the end of our breakdown. Regardless of where you personally stand on eschatology, you have to admit the sheer structural density of this interpretation is pretty remarkable. It transforms sweeping ancient poetic texts into a highly structured, mathematically precise 14-year timeline. So it leaves us with a really compelling question. How does viewing Scripture through such a strict chronological and mathematical lens change the fundamental way we engage with ancient prophecies? Does it clarify the mysteries, or does it risk turning theology into a giant math equation? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I hope you found this systematic breakdown as fascinating as I did. Keep learning, keep analyzing, and I'll catch you in the next one.